This video is made possible by people like you. Thank you for supporting me throughout the year. My word, am I thankful for terrible video games. Perhaps one day in the future we will move past the need for bad video games to enrich our lives, but for now, in the year 2022 AD, the worst games released this year are still doing wonderful work. I'm a little too checked out to be angry whenever I play a bad video game these days, and so I ended up having fun playing half of these, which does make it a little harder to rank them, but bad video games help to highlight the intense quality of other far better games, so I'm certainly not resentful here. But hey, it's nearly Christmas, so if you've got any of these games lined up as a gift for someone you care about, don't. Save these for your enemies. Horror games have the capacity to really impact the player. Obviously they can be scary, which is kind of the whole point for a lot of people, but there's this added component of horror games being gore fests. It's a hard line to straddle at times, but having graphic violence in a game, which for this video will be represented by this kitten because I want to be able to afford food this month, having this kind of stuff in a game can often detract from a game's scares. It's a form of feeling uncomfortable, but it's not fear per se. This is perhaps most evident in Martha is Dead, which made headlines this year for the way in which Sony censored the PlayStation version due to some particularly grisly scenes that they felt didn't need to meet the eyeballs of their paying customers. Kinda says a lot that the only positives I heard with this game was from people saying the censored scenes weren't that bad. The rest of the game, meanwhile, is kind of distracted, I guess. I suppose it is ultimately a horror game, but one that tries to funnel you to the graphic content whenever possible, and that ends up clouding a lot of the story and the atmosphere. It takes me out of the moment when I can see where the game is going and what kind of kittens are coming up next, and actually the standard gameplay is incredibly dull. Perhaps what Martha is Dead struggles with most of all though is its depiction of mental health, which 100% had the potential to be something really thought-provoking and nuanced, but ends up painfully one-dimensional and maybe even a bit insulting if you think about it too hard. Like, there's some stuff to work with if you build a game around mental illness, but Martha is Dead is too keen to rush to the next gory scene to care much. Highly promising, but a deflated balloon of a video game. No one wants that. The biggest problem with spiritual successors is that they're putting themselves in direct comparison with what is generally quite a good video game. The Callisto Protocol goes one step further and is actually directed by the co-creator of Dead Space, but instead of that being some kind of special advantage, it places this game in the same company as something like Yooka-Laylee. Like, there's some genuine talent in the dev team and you can tell that they wanted to make something in the same ilk as Dead Space, especially after EA shut down Visceral Games and tasked Motive Studios to remake the first Dead Space, but it really doesn't come together in the Callisto Protocol. I like the first half, and if I blow my vision I can convince myself that I'm playing a new Dead Space game, but the second half of this game is simply a mess. There's no other word for it really. I don't think I've played too many games that have not just dropped the ball, but stabbed it with a knife, so that all you're left with is huge difficulty spikes and far too many late game enemies that can one-shot you. The good news is that the game's quite short, so this insufferable second half only lasts a few hours, but the bad news is that the game's quite short, so overall you'll struggle to get more than 6 hours out of the Callisto Protocol. It's a very mixed bag that leans me more towards feeling bitter because damn, it works hard to undo all the good things from the start of the game. But hey, at least it looks good, just hanging up in a gallery somewhere. Kart racing games are so common and so easy to make that you can look up virtually any major franchise and see a quirky racing game attached to it. Square Enix threw Final Fantasy into the mix this year with Chocobo GP, where you race around circuits as your favourite adorable Final Fantasy character, but mainly the giant chickens that give the game its name. So easy to make and surely hard to screw up, but hey, we wouldn't be talking about it if they didn't. And my god did they fuck this up. There's the surface level issues like the boring track layouts and the general lack of inspiration when it comes to the circuits you're racing around, but the more pressing issue is Square's decision to ruin Chocobo GP with microtransactions. You cannot release a game for the Switch with the kind of scummy microtransactions that you'd see in a mobile game, and definitely not while you're still charging quite a bit of money just to own the game. Also, maybe don't do this with a game for ages 3 and above, and with a game that has the sort of cutesy aesthetic that is obviously appealing to younger children. You're gonna have kids asking their parents why they can't have this skin for their favorite character that costs actual money to buy, and that is not okay under any circumstances. It should have been an easy win for Square, but here they are fucking things up. I wonder if that'll happen again in this video at all. For the most part, the games that I was looking forward to this year didn't let me down. The video I made back in January that looked at every month and predicted which game would do best hasn't aged particularly well though, since like Zelda was delayed and Forspoken was delayed, and no game illustrates this fact better than Gotham Knights. Oh god, this game promised so much with characters to play as that often don't get their share of the limelight, and it's kind of a loose follow-up to the Arkham games, albeit without any canonical attachment and without the help of Rocksteady Studios, who are responsible for cranking out 3 really impressive Batman games. What we're left with is an underdeveloped game with a terrible loot system featuring characters who all feel the same, beating up enemies using a fighting system that doesn't have enough feedback to feel satisfying. It's so hard to not compare Gotham Knights to the Arkham games, and even though that may seem unfair, given that different people are involved this time, an open world action game starring superheroes who excel at both hand-to-hand combat and stealth? Yeah, it's not fooling anyone. As such, Gotham Knights is a lukewarm take on something we've seen done better years ago, with a thin but noticeable layer of not quite live service gently laid on top. It's not a live service game, but the loot system is so grindy that it makes me feel like it was at some point during development. I get the sense that no one knew what kind of game was being made here. A confident game it is not. Hey, what would you get if you crossed Fortnite with Genshin Impact and then took most of their clothes away? A headache? It sure does sound like a headache, but actually no, it was a game created by human hands this year called Waifu Impact. And it's at times like this that I'm grateful that video games exist, because what the fuck is this? Bare Bones doesn't even begin to cover just how little this game has to offer other than the low-res textures of various women, but I quite like how this is advertised on Nintendo's website as an immersive single-player game in a paradisiac deserted island. Triple word score for paradisiac. That is a word I don't see often enough. I don't know what you want me to say here. I feel like I've covered all the basics, though I would say that in the surprisingly grand history of terrible indie games that have somehow squeaked their way onto the Nintendo Switch, Waifu Impact isn't as horrendous as something like Room in the Night Sky. You run around a beach and shoot other girls with a water gun, and it honestly never gets more complicated than that. Hey, at least it has less gacha than Genshin. If you found yourself staring down the barrel of a new Postal game this year, then oh damn, have we got to catch you up with this little mistake of a franchise. None of these games are all that good, but they're absurd and offensive and exist as some form of counterculture that doesn't really care much for quality, because its main character is using a cat's arsehole as a silencer for a gun. High art this is not, but I appreciate them for showing me things that I never thought I'd see in a video game, and for causing governments all around the world to shit themselves whenever a new one comes out. That being said, Postal 3 was shockingly awful in every way and actually painful to play, so Postal 4, no regrets, yeah that was done deliberately, has a low bar to clear. And here it comes now.
Oh my word, look at that.
Postal 4 is apparently the true sequel to Postal 2, which tells me that the people behind these games aren't too proud of Postal 3. Well, maybe they should be, because clearly they've modeled Postal 4 after how back-breakingly terrible the third game was, except now we've returned to first person, so progress? Nah, not really. It is hard to criticize this game for being janky and feeling unfinished, because that's kind of half the appeal of Postal games, but I draw the line at the technical issues making it difficult to sit through. The poor optimization kind of transcends the so bad it's good quality that Postal 4 is probably going for, and it moves it firmly into contention for a video like this. I don't really care how anti-convention this game is when it's a struggle to get anything done when playing it. There is not enough here for this to be okay. Hey, you thought Chocobo GP was exploitative and dodgy as fuck, and don't worry, it still is, but it was hardly the only freemium experience to make some bad waves this year. Diablo Immortal was met with some pretty massive backlash in 2018 when the latest Diablo game was revealed to not be a PC game like Diablo 4, and actually a shitty mobile game designed to loosen your purse strings, but hey, that was 4 years before Diablo Immortal was due to come out, so maybe it's actually not as bad as people thought? Nah, actually, it's exactly as bad as people thought. I don't get why developers keep doing this. Well, there's a very good reason, or should I say $1 million daily worth of reasons, but at the cost of a game that is kind of dominated by its economy. The kind of dungeon crawling that usually goes on in a typical Diablo game is naturally a good fit for a business model that promotes microtransactions and pay-to-win systems, but unfortunately for Blizzard, those kinds of things are really fucking annoying to see in a video game. I want to say that Blizzard should know better, but we all know that they know exactly what they're doing, and the way in which Diablo Immortal allows new players to be gently fed under a steamroller of pay-to-win obsessives until they feel embarrassed enough to buy into this mess, it's a shitty thing to do. This game gives me the ick, and I don't like it. Oh my god, could you imagine if Blizzard did this twice in 1 year? That'd be insane! It wouldn't be a shitty Games of the Year video if I didn't have a plethora of shitty FPS games to pick from, and actually, it's a sign of changing times that there's really only been one standout terrible shooter. Or at least there hasn't been anything quite as bad as Crossfire X. If that name doesn't sound immediately familiar to you, that's your own fault, because the 2007 Crossfire game is basically the most played video game anywhere on planet Earth with 1 billion registered players, and so it makes sense that a console version would be commissioned. Unfortunately, that version is horrifically optimized with busted controls that never let the gunplay feel fluid or, you know, fun. It's like budget Counter-Strike, but the game hates you for some reason. All the publicity I heard of Crossfire X was that it played like a terrible FPS game from 20 years ago, which I suppose isn't too far off, but when I played it and threw myself into the single player, I was surprised to see that that's terrible as well. That's a new feature to Crossfire, so even the stuff not carried over from the 2007 game is fucking useless as part of this package. It's a multiplayer shooter with an identity crisis attempting to appeal to two different demographics with features from a 15-year-old game, and unsurprisingly, that messy cocktail tastes really bad. Remedy made Control, for fuck's sake. They can do so much better. Sometimes you can see a bad game coming, and even though Babylon's Fall had Platinum Games at the helm, a terrible beta test in late 2021 kinda set the tone for what was to come. Every year we have one of those games that comes out early on, maybe February or March time, and is so bad that it burns through all the energy in a short space of time, and when it gets to December and I have to make this video, I genuinely thought that Babylon's Fall came out last year. Like, I have been emotionally checked out on this game for more than half a year, and that is long enough for me to think that I don't have to worry about it anymore. Alas, reality is cruel and unfair, and so we're back with Babylon's Fall for hopefully the last time. A deeply uninspired waste of everyone's time that reuses a handful of assets in areas that repeat over and over again, and all the creativity and charm that you'd usually expect to find in a typical Platinum's game product has wandered off somewhere else, I think. Probably Bayonetta 3 or something. On launch, Babylon's Fall had 1,200 people playing it, and 2 months later, that was down to one player in the world who was still playing this game. Understandably, the servers are being shut down altogether in February of next year, and frankly, that's a year too late. How have Square been culpable for 2 incredibly mediocre games in the last 2 years? That's gotta be a crime. Over the many years that I've been making these end-of-year videos, I've gradually developed an understanding of what a worst game of any year should look like, and it's not necessarily the technical worst game of the year. I think games are often a lot more than merely the sum of their parts, and conversely, a game that actively harms the reputation of gaming in the wider world and is significantly less than the sum of its parts is worth taking notice of. I feel like this kind of video needs to take less pot shots at crappy indie games that are still in early access and should set its sights on bigger targets. I feel dirty even saying that I spent some of my time playing Overwatch 2 this year, given that Activision Blizzard have done very little to redeem themselves after all the scandals and controversies came out. But you know, I enjoyed the first game, and since the sequel is basically just the first game again, but with a few tiny additions and tweaks, I thought, why the hell not? Plus, the first game has been shut down now, so this is now the only way to experience Overwatch in any form. What a truly grim world to live in. Let's start with the good stuff. It's free to play and it's 5v5 now with less of a focus on tanks, so the gameplay is a little less grindy in Overwatch 2. That's kind of it, because the rest of the positives are either so tiny that they're not really worth mentioning, or left over from Overwatch 1, and I'm not praising this game for not ruining a good game. Mainly because Blizzard did that anyway. The main appeal of the sequel was PvE, but they delayed that until next year and ended up releasing an unfinished game instead that was so unfinished that it didn't even work at launch. The game balance is so busted that they've had to take certain characters out because they're too game-breaking, even though they worked in the first game. And when this is a game that comes out with a battle pass and cosmetics that at launch would set you back $19 a piece, you start to see the point of Overwatch 2. It's a lazy sequel that doesn't make too many changes, but changes the monetization model to encourage players to purchase a battle pass that may eventually give them what they want. Blizzard have successfully created a game that makes me wish that loot boxes were still here, because at least they were sometimes free, and when this is only really done under the guise of generating goodwill towards the company and writing different headlines, I can't help but see Overwatch 2 as the cynical, soulless project that it is. From a technical perspective, not the worst game of any year, but there's no game from 2022 that I'd rather delete from existence. And it'd fucking deserve it too. Anyway, those are my worst games of the year. Do you agree, or did you find something worse this year? Either way, let me know in a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. And if you need something else to watch right now, there's a video here where I ranked every game of the year last week. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including the Green Scorpion, Scott Riker, and Raina Baina Bobana. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.